So the tie rod goes in from underneath and goes up into the steering arm, or the, I guess the knuckle arms. And then it's a 7/8 inch socket. Those good and snug. And then we'll tighten that nut just a little bit to line up the cotter pin once they're tight, or once they're snugged up with each other. There we go. That one's lined up. I think you can see in here how little room there is between the ball joint and my wheel, so that's the reason for those wheel spacers. But now there's enough room, nothing touches, and even if we need to put weights on there when we balance them, should clear that as well. Steering rod the same way. The same boots are supposed to fit it, so got 2 sets of those energy suspension boots. That's going to fit nice. And the top ones, let's see, we need to go this one to here. Castle nut to there. And I have to go find the castle nut. I think I've swapped this bar around. It doesn't matter, but I think I took the castle nut that was on this other side. I think it came off this arm, and so it's probably in a bag with the original bolts for the steering box. Alright, so I've dug up another castle nut. And to get this tight, we're going to need to put this other wheel on. We'll stab 4 cotter pins in that, and this project is done. You guys have now seen me rebuild the rear, or recondition the rear axle, recondition the front axle. I've put exhaust on it, although I didn't film it, so I'll clip in a few pictures of that. The thing I'm going to do now is put on a steering stabilizer, which looks like a shock absorber, but basically the compression and the extension need to have equal pressure, so that when you turn left or right, because this is moving horizontally, it's not trying to force you to go the other direction. So if you had, like, a shock absorber would always want to extend back out, and if it did that, then it would always be trying to, in this case, turn you to the right. But what we've got is pull this shock, or this stabilizer, all the way out, and I have about 9 1/4 inches of throw, and if we push it all the way in, Well, that measurement would be 0 now. So so we have 9 1/4 throw, so we want half of that, which so about 4 5/8 inches. So we can pull this back out. There we go. So 4 5/8 inches. That puts it centered in the system. And what we're going to want to do is mount this to our axle tube and to the tie rod that ties both wheels together, so that as we turn left or right, or more importantly as you hit a hole in the road or in the trail and it tries to pull the wheel one way or the other, you've got a little help with it not yanking it out of your hand. This one was what was already installed on the truck. It looked to be in fairly new condition, so we're basically just reinstalling it. And the way it had been installed was with one end real close to the bend here, so we'll basically copy that. And I think we want this to go this direction, so we'll be putting this on like this. And then I did get some new hardware. It uses nylock nuts, so I got some new hardware to put on the U-bolts. So that's going to go that way, and then the shock will go in that hole, and then this end. What we'll do is go ahead and tighten this on here. That will set where we are going to put the other end based on the overall length of what we've set our dampener at. So this looks like to be a 1/2 inch. Okay, I just looked at some pictures real quick and I'm putting it on backwards. So we'll swap this around real quick. I was kind of wondering about it with all this bushing and everything, if they wouldn't be hitting these bolts. And sure enough, looking at the way it was previously installed, looks like that would have been potentially would have been an issue. Now, when whoever installed this last time, this axle tube is probably smaller than the Dana 44 that it was bought for. And that's fine, but they used a stack of washers to try and fill up the length of the thread that was too much. So as we figure out what that's going to be, I'm gonna use regular nuts on here initially to get it cinched down, and then I can figure out how much extra we have, and I'm either going to thread the rest of this U-bolt or make some spacers for the U-bolt that will not there won't be a whole bunch of washers. It's like they used every washer in their arsenal. I just had to figure out which way to turn this other bracket, because to keep it essentially centered, it was going to put it right in the middle of my differential. I also needed to make sure I had enough room . So just like other shock absorber bushings and whatnot, you want to tighten up the nut on the end of the shaft and on the opposite end down here. You want to tighten it until the rubber bushing is the same diameter or slightly larger, and just barely slightly larger than the washer that it's cupped into. So the brackets, you're going to tighten those. You want about the same amount sticking out on top and bottom of those U-bolts. That tells you they're tight and it's fairly even. Same over here. And then, I mean, this is a really simple system. You got a pair of U-bolts holding this bracket on, a pair of U-bolts holding it onto the axle, and we just separated them by measuring out the length of this shaft sticking out, and it's right about 4 5/8, which tells us we're just about dead center of having the travel in and out for the steering. So just to check it, I'm going to put it up on the jack real quick and turn the wheels left and right, and then I'm just going to get a 9/16 inch wrench here and just make sure those are all tight, and tighten the bushings just a little more. The battery on this died, so otherwise we're close to being done with the steering stabilizer install. We're hitting the stop about 3/4, maybe 3/4 to 5/8 of an inch before the pistons bottoms out. Go the other way. Except for we're hitting the cover. Right there. So I think we're going to loosen this and roll it up just a little bit to try and get a little bit more turn out of it. Alright, so I think I'm going to loosen the ones on the axle and rotate it up just a hair as well. So obviously with a factory cover, this wouldn't probably be a big deal, or a deal at all. Yeah, about 8 7/8 inches sticking out. So I think we can tighten this one. And clears, I'm going to run it back the other way to the stop. And just make sure that if I move it, I'll just then we haven't changed our other geometry. That looks pretty good. Nothing hits there either. Alright. Okay, so my camera cut out there. It overheated is what happened. It's sitting in the sun. So all I did was finish tightening up the brackets, bolts on the axle, and I think I'd already tightened these when you saw it. And then I added jam nuts here, and then I always put just a red dot of paint from a paint stick, just to show that I've already messed with, tightened those, torqued those bolts. You'll see all the bolts tend to have that, so it's just my method of so that when I go back to double check everything, I can see whether I've already had a wrench on it or not. It should be tight. So that's it for the steering stabilizer. So what I've got here is some soft aluminum, 3/8 inch, and I'm making my fuel pressure line versus the fuel return line, which is on this side. And I'm going to use some rib nuts to be able to put some clamps in the frame. So what we're going to do now is just get the first one up here and installed so that I can put one there, one somewhere in here, one down here, kind of match what I did on the other side. And so we'll pre-drill all that with an 1/8 inch drill bit, and then drill it for a 344 is the diameter of that rib nut. And we'll install the rib nuts and the clamps. We'll be using some Dell clamps, which is just a stainless steel or aluminum. These are all stainless steel with a rubber grommet type over it. And install it somewhat. Somewhere in there my camera shut off, so I have no idea where. I'll just keep going on. Hopefully it wasn't too long ago. This aside. We're going to come off of, it's a 6 fitting up here. We're going to put a 90 on it and come back just kind of like I've done the return line, and I'm going to clamp that return line up here so that it's tight to the engine. But we'll go ahead and come off of there with a 90, make sure it clears our throttle linkage down, and then we'll run a 45 into this fitting here. So got those, I think, in this box. So this is all push lock on this side. There we go. We can come off with a 45 here. And if I've got another 45, we'll just do a 45 there and a 45 here and go all. Now, I like to use Windex, but I don't have any, so what we're going to be using is just some glass cleaner. And I use that as a lubricant for this because it evaporates pretty darn quick. And it should allow you to push these fittings all the way on. So we'll just use this one up here so it matches the one that's on the other side. This one down here. There it can't be seen. And then, like I said, we need to put a fuel filter in line. I knew this project was too easy. So what we've got is a little inline filter, just mounted to the side of the frame rail as we get ready. around so you guys can see. What I'm talking about. So I'm going to put this fuel filter down here so when working on the truck, it's easy enough to get to. So what I'm going to do is I'll cut the line about in the middle here and bend it down and around, and we won't be able to put the fitting on this one because that's the side we'll have to slide everything up. But we'll go ahead and put the fitting on the back side because it won't matter. And one of the things I like to do is rather than having hardline to hardline coming straight into this filter, is we'll put a flex line on one side, doesn't matter which side, we'll put a flex line on it so that you have the ability to move stuff around a little bit. So let's see, let's more in there ought to work. All right, so let's loosen those fittings. Alright, so we want to bend this out, down, and over, and then we can, so we're going to do a couple of tight bends. That's too small. That's too small, that straightens. So we're going to be using this one. Filter's going to sit like that. We'll come off this side with a piece of hose and up. So this one can just turn out. What I'm doing is trying to get this handle and that arm parallel, so that as I bend this, it'll come straight out off the frame and not be at weird angles. This tubing is soft enough you could twist it if you needed to. Nice just to start with it, not needing it. So what I was trying to do is figure out what fittings I have to come off of here. Let's go ahead and screw this one back down. Keep this as short as I can. Maybe a 90 on the hose and then a short hose. Now what we'll have is that fuel filter sitting there. Come off here. Come out like that and up. Like that. That's going to look really nice. That gives us, with the hose on there, that gives us the ability to change out that filter over time if we need to, or when we need to. So we need to make us a list. We need heat shield for the hard line. We need a clamp for the fuel filter, and we need a clamp for the 3/8 line with 3/8 hole. And this is a 1/4" line on the other side, so we could use the same thing up there on that one. So we measure the diameter of this filter, and then the last thing we need to do is put the male end on that. Put this on here. I think we're going to trim this one back as well, in parallel to this back line. Something like that. Installing this in there. So this is our pressure line. So I think had thought we'd use a 90 on that. So depending on where that goes, I could go in there and do a straight. We may want to straight there, and straight onto the end. So I think we've got it over here. So we got us a plan. Hey, well, welcome back. It's been about a week or so since I was on messing with the frame. I've been working on the Scout body, trying to get some of the sheet metal finished up on the driver's side on that so that I can get that video out to you guys. It was requested that I do more detail, so I filmed almost everything and in pretty good detail. So what I have now is about 40 or 50 hours of video that I need to pare down to something manageable. And I've noticed when I do the part 1, part 2, part 3 of a series, the part 1 usually gets watched pretty well, and part 2 and 3 it kind of falls off. So I might do a part 1, part 2, but I'm trying to condense that much material down to something informative yet not so overwhelmingly long. I mean, we may still end up with a feature-length movie out of it, but we'll see. I've had a couple of pretty long videos here recently on the axles, and you've seen those already as I've been putting this frame together. So the next thing that's up is, it's been about a week since I was talking to you, and I got my clamp in for my fuel filter. So we're going to go ahead and get that mounted today. I got the heat sleeve for the fuel line, so we'll pull these clamps, run that heat sleeve up it, and then we can put this last fitting on here. And then if you recall, at the very front I wanted to mount the fuel line and the return line to the back of the engine block, and I needed some clamps for that. So we'll kind of talk about that in a little while, but you know what I ended up doing was getting some more 3/8 Adele clamps, and I'm sure Adele is a brand name, but everything else on here is stainless steel with the rubber around it, and I got some aluminum ones. Stainless steel clamps are very difficult to enlarge the bolt hole size. You try and drill them, they catch real easy and spin, and trying to even use like a punch and just flare or widen the hole out with a punch where you're just stretching the metal, that's extremely difficult. But what I found over time is if you buy the aluminum version, and you just have to look for them, you can easily drill the hole out, easily flare it, whatever you need to do, because the aluminum stretches much easier. So that's what we're using. I'll give you some other options when we get up there and start installing those. So anyway, I'm going to point the camera at the fuel filter here, and we're going to get this fuel line done as a final install. I'm still going to leave fittings loose because we know we're going to be flushing this line out once we get some fuel in the tank. So that's today's project to finish that up. And then I got a few other things that I want to tie up some loose ends around here. I'm tired of welding overhead on the body and having sparks drip down on me, so we're going to find something that we don't have to get burned today. So this heat sleeve, I bought 1/2 inch and I bought some I bought 2 1/2 inch. I thought I bought 1 3/4, but I might have had that already. And I just got these off Amazon. They're good to like 1300 degrees or something insulation wise. So, and the only real goal here is that we're going to put this on here, and the idea being that we're not going to transfer quite as much heat off the exhaust into this aluminum fuel line on its way to the fuel injection. On the other side, not too worried about it getting heat transfer going back to a tank full of fuel. So I'm going to run enough that I can actually go almost all the way up the fuel line, or I will go all the way up. And we'll put a piece of heat shrink up there on the top so we can heat shrink it in. And we'll just come back probably that far right there. So that's probably enough. The other thing I think we're going to do is add some lock washers to all these bolts, since they're going in for what I believe will be the final time. A couple pieces of 1/2 inch heat shrink, and the heat shrink I like to use for anything on the exterior, but especially stuff like this where it could move around. It's called a double wall, and it has adhesive in it. Once it heats up, there's a glue inside there that, like in this case, the heat shrink or the heat sleeve, and it'll attach itself to the tubing itself so that the thing's not moving around all over the place and sliding and getting out of place. So, except for I talked about all that, but I forgot to put the first one on. So heat shrink first. So this stuff goes on really easy if you're pushing it. If you're pulling it, it actually tightens up and shrinks, and it won't slide. So just try working it from the back and pushing, and you'll find it'll slide right on. You're also kind of making it larger in diameter as you're doing this. So if you were trying to go over something that was really close to like this is 1/2 inch diameter stuff, you'd still be able to get it on there, as long as you kind of push it together so that it gets fatter in the middle instead of shrinking. Alright, so I'm going to work this in and move the camera. We're looking at the back of the motor here. And what I'm thinking is we're going to get that heat shrink right up against that fitting. What we're going to do is, now we want to start kind of stretching it so that it's as small as it can be in diameter up here towards the top. Fold it over on itself a little bit. Now we can ride it up inside the heat shrink. Go through the whole thing and clamp it down as I go, so that as we're doing this, it keeps pulling the sleeve tighter rather than ending up with somewhere where it's bunched up. So we're going to be using the little external star lock washers. we have it. Completed fuel system, minus a fuel tank, which we will be working on. Let's clean up all this stuff and move on to something else. So as far as the exhaust, I haven't done any tips yet, and that's going to get done once the rear bumper and everything's in place so that I can kind of bring them out. I know they're low enough to clear the fuel tank. I don't know if I want to come straight out, or if I'm going to want to put turn downs, or even come out and turn out at a corner or something, because the bumper will stick out a little ways. Fuel tank actually mounts to the bottom of the body, but it sits in this big hole here, so all of this, the fuel tank's actually turned around backwards, if you can see it in there. Kind of can't. But anyway, so for the exhaust, we have just two glass packs, and they are set with the scoops facing the motor, so that as the exhaust comes through, they'll catch them. That's my preferred method. Some of these things will actually have directional arrows. These didn't, so you could have put them on either way. The rest of it is just 2 1/4 inch pipe. I bought a hot rod kit. It's aluminized pipe, not stainless or anything, but I just bought a hot rod kit from Summit Racing, and 2 1/4. Then I ended up using a couple pieces of pipe, 90s, and right here, I think a couple 45s or something, or maybe it's right here, that I got at O'Reilly Auto Parts. So they're just the off-the-shelf. And between the two kits, the kit was a header back kit, so it didn't have anything. It had the over the axle stuff, but it didn't have anything to get me all the way up to my exhaust manifolds. So I used some Napa Auto Parts exhaust manifold flanges. They got me the right inside diameter and had the correct hole spacing. The holes are a little larger than the bolts that we're using, but that didn't matter. New exhaust gaskets. On the passenger side, I got rid of the diverter valve for the EGR stuff that's supposed to help heat the carb and all that. It was frozen in a mostly closed position, so it wasn't helping it run well at all. Anyway, I came back, did this separate H-pipe, which was another kit, basically the tubes, and it came with a straight and a pipe that had a V-bend in it. I actually ended up using the V-bend pipe somewhere else in here. And you'll see this side's a little lower than that side as it comes back, because there's a very narrow area here where it can go between the transfer case and the frame. And I just used some wood shims to space it everywhere, clear of everything that I was afraid it could ever touch. And then the factory had a mount on this flange from off the transfer case, and it was this big bulky thing that you really had to squish the tube. I mean, the original pipe had an area about 6 inches long, where it was only about 1.5 inches wide through here. So this would, by changing the mount type, this allowed me to keep the pipe diameter correct. And I went in and put the H pipe in, ran back over the exhaust. So total, I have about like 2 days of time in the exhaust between mocking it up and then welding all the seams. You can see there's quite a few pipe seams where I had to make things fit. I really only have about $400 in the exhaust system, including clamps, mounts, flanges, pipe, and mufflers. So, and I have a little bit of the exhaust pipe left over. I have, I think I bought a total of 6 clamps, and I only ended up using 4 so far, but when I put the tips on, I would probably just use clamps to put the tips on. Or the whatever I do, side exit, whatever I decide to do with it. I'll probably just use clamps back there for that, so that the mufflers can be changed fairly easily. And that's it. So, and then the exhaust is all painted with high heat. I scuffed it and then painted it with high heat paint, 2000 degree paint. And then the whole thing, you take these 2 clamps off, and if you take them, you can take the mufflers off or not, but you can undo all of the mounts, and the whole thing will slide out the rear. If you take the rear shocks, at least one rear shock off, get it out of the way, and the whole thing will slide out the rear of the truck. That's the simplest way I could come up with and keep it real clean without a whole bunch of clamps and flanges in it to leak. Fuel system's done. Oh, we've got to put the clamps up here on the front up by the engine, so I'll show you what I did there and then we'll move on. Okay, so I used a couple of the aluminum Adele clamps and I just drilled out the hole for a larger size that will fit this into the head, and these are going to mount there. Another option that I thought about later is you could take a helicoil and run a helicoil in there and basically convert this down to 1/4 inch so that you could use a 1/4 inch bolt. Just another method of getting the same job done. The problem with all of this stuff is it's sometimes hard to get the size clamp or the size through hole that you want in a clamp. They really cut like the 6mm, and which is basically 1/4 inch hole. And to get anything much larger than that, you either have to go to a large clamp, or every now and then you can find somebody who's doing a special type on it, which you would think a 5/16 or 3/8 hole wouldn't be that big a deal. But the clamp has to get wider. I'm just going to use a button head that uses a socket, or that uses a Allen wrench. And to keep them from coming out, I put a little bit of Loctite on them. Fuel system minus a fuel tank. So let's move on to something else. Alright, so next up for the frame is I have made some plates with 4 holes in them, and I'm going to weld some nuts on here. See how that looks. And these nuts don't have any, I use them all the time, but they don't have any oxide coating or cadmium or anything like that. I like them because they're called a heavy hex or a thick wall hex. And what they're good for is there's just a little more meat on there, and so you can get them lined up and weld them, and there's just that extra amount of meat. Plus you don't have to do any prep work taking coatings off that are toxic when you weld with them. So, and what my thinking is here is eventually I want to do some kind of Nerf bar, rock slider, step, whatever you want to call it. So I made these plates with the holes in them, and I can make another identical set. They're on the plasma table. We drill those out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill 4 holes in the frame big enough for the nut to go into, and I'm going to put that in there so the nut is captured, and then I'm going to weld that plate to the frame, and I'm trying to weld them same place all the way around. So I'll have some back here, I'll have another one all the way up front here as far as I can get it. I can come back and bolt these onto the frame and then build off of this, build my step, and it can then be bolted on and off, and so you can tack weld it while it's up under here, then pull it off, weld it up, send it out for powder coat or paint or whatever you want to do to it. Once we're done with this little project, I've got this wire. I've got 2 rolls here with 2 different gauges. So this one is 18 gauge wire, and I'm going to be running all LED lights. So I've got a multi-strand wire cable here. Let's show you what I got. See that? Yeah. So there's all those strands. And what that will do is give me all of my tail lights, brake lights, blinkers, everything that needs to go to the back of the truck. That. And then I've got another one that's same thing, 7 wires again. This one is 14 gauge, and these are for my trailer lights. So rather than splicing off of my tail lights, I'm going to run a separate set of wires to the back of the truck that are heavier gauge and are fused separately from the truck. So much like modern vehicles are done, where if you, modern being in the last maybe 10 years, where if you're towing a trailer and the trailer lights short out or whatever, your truck lights don't also blow their fuse because they short out. The systems are kept separate as much as possible. So I've got 2 rolls of wire. Obviously I don't want to pull these through the frame rails until I'm done welding with that other. And another obvious thing would be, had I thought of this early, I could have done this before I ever painted the frame, but it's not that big a deal. This paint's real easy to lay back on. It's just a gloss black, and it's made to go on raw metal. You don't even have to prime it. So I will put a little bit of, after I weld, I'll put some primer on the back side of this plate so that it doesn't have a chance to rust between the 2 pieces of metal. And then we'll get our 4 holes drilled, weld, use a wire wheel, clean the paint off the frame, weld this on, and then one of these days we'll push this outside real quick and spray the 4 brackets. And then we'll get this, once we get these plates welded on, we'll pull this wire through the frame rails. Pretty good look at my welds. I was using .025 wire, which is really too small for this weld, for the material. You can turn it up high enough and get a good weld out of it. It's just, you're running about 100 inches a minute. So that's it for these braces. I've got all 4 of these welded on now. Just need to let them cool a little bit, and then I'll knock off the burned paint and we'll get those repainted. And as soon as it cools down a little bit more, I'll go ahead and pull my wire through, and essentially the frame is done. All right, so a buddy of mine pointed out the other day when he was here that I had clamped this hard line to the head, and the only flex in it is actually above that clamp. And you guys can make fun of me in the comments. I certainly did it and didn't catch it. I did it to both sides. So in my mind, I was going to be putting these clamps on the firewall, and then when I got to putting stuff together, for some reason I went ahead and put them into the back of the head there. So those are going to come loose and get bolted to the firewall of the truck so that the the body and the frame, which will be, you know, I mean, they've got polyurethane mounts going between them, so essentially hard mounted together. Then the flex will be between the engine and the hard line so that the engine can rock and move. So make fun of me when you see that earlier in the video, but I did find out about it, figured out, and we're going to take care of it. So okay, I ran a piece of baling wire into that hole and all the way down the frame to out the back of the frame rail. And then that piece of baling wire, I just poked it through the wire sheathing there and then bent it back on itself. And that gets one cable in there. So that's going to get the first cable in, and then we're just going to tape this one with some electrical tape to the first. We want to do a pretty good job because there's going to be a little friction. This shouldn't be that big a deal. It was real easy to put the baling wire through and all that, so this really shouldn't take too long. Then just tape it all over, and you want to make sure you get that baling wire hook end, the end you poked through. You want to make sure you get it taped up so that it doesn't catch on anything as you're pulling. Then just take the wire, we're going to kind of lay it out the front of the truck. Alright, so you can see the wire laying off the front of the frame rail. This is a job that would be easier with two people. That baling wire goes all the way through the frame rail and comes out very back there where when we put this new piece on, there's a hole in here for the bolts for the bumpers. So we've got that baling wire, and we'll just kind of feed and pull the wire over and over. So you can see it's been pretty easy. And then when we're finished here, we'll put either a grommet or some kind of wire protection on the actual cables themselves. And then we just go to the back and pull. Feed some more in. I'm just looking inside the frame oils, and I can already see the wires past here, but it's not quite to here yet. So it's coming along. We've just got a few more pulls to make. I'm just going to use this cardboard to kind of block everything so we don't get a whole lot of overspray. Let that dry for about 10 minutes to flash off, and then we'll do another coat. It's been about 10 minutes. Looks like not completely dry, but that's good. Now this is the same paint I used to paint the whole frame, and it's a straight to bare metal type paint. So the fact that nothing is primed or whatever on the exterior is not going to hurt us. And we've got probably enough in here for one more shot, so we'll Give it another few minutes, and we'll shoot it one more time, and that'll be it. That's it, everybody. It's painted, touched up. It's really ready for the body to be put back on it. The body's just not ready because I've not worked on it in quite a few weeks. I need to finish up the last of the rust repair that we were doing, and that's coming up. This has taken many months, so all the pieces of the framework you see took place over, I don't know, 6+ months worth of time, just because I kept getting sidetracked onto other things. So body work, and you work on something for so long and then you're just tired of it for a while, so it's time to kind of switch around and do something else that you're a little less tired of, more interested in. I don't know. Anyway, we've got a couple little projects up on the front that can be done after the body's on, but before we replace the front clip. And they're all just a little bracket on the engine and some brake lines up to where the master cylinder will be. So, again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned a little something. And stick around for more International Scout 2 projects. I'm calling it Project Creep because the project just keeps creeping. And other than that, we're going to call it a week. Have a great day. We'll see you.